Have you ever wondered whether the problems in the world today would exist if we had deeper connection to ourselves, others, and the environment, and acted from that place?
Welcome to the Conscious Action Podcast with your hosts Brian Berneman and Kayla Greenville, who believe that connection is the key to taking conscious action as individuals and creating a better world.
We are here to raise awareness and inspire meaningful action by sharing stories, knowledge, and conversations with thought leaders and change makers.
From sustainability to well-being and everything related to conscious living, our mission is to empower you to be the change that you want to see in the world. Welcome everyone to a new episode of the Conscious Action Podcast. I am Brian Berneman, your host. And for this episode, I have the pleasure to be joined by Quenelda Clegg, all the way just from the next neighborhood here in Auckland. But it's still really lovely to be able to be with you, Quenelda. And thank you so much for being here with us on this episode and for having what I am sure that will be a wonderful conversation. For everyone that is listening, who is Quenelda?
Kia ora. Thank you so much for having me, Brian. It's great to be on your show and to be a part of what you're doing around meaningful action and collaboration. So I can just introduce myself a little bit. So I currently am the Director of Programs at ChildFund New Zealand. I have been with ChildFund for 5 years next month, and it's been a really incredible journey. I have got to work with communities in Zambia and Kenya, in Sri Lanka, and also supporting communities in the Pacific, in Kiribati, Solomon Islands, Timor-Leste, and of course, we have a partner in Southeast Asia, which is Vietnam. But I'll just give you a bit of background to give you some insight into who I am. So I did grow up in Australia. And my mother's side is from the country Victoria, and a small town called Manu. And growing up there, it was quite idyllic. But I really was conscious of the fact that there was often drought and very low rainfall. And what I saw in my childhood, and as I grew up and spending many holidays there, was that this became increasingly so. And so in my lifetime, I have seen this country have just been destroyed by climate change, and it now is completely dry, and the farmers and the communities have been driven out. And that for me was very, very powerful in my youth. So I had that experience growing up. And then before being with ChildFund, I was with the World Bank in Sydney, which was a really interesting experience working at the more high-level, multilateral level. But before that, I was in East Timor, and I worked with the United Nations, and I also worked with a community school. And it was just really incredible to see the resilience of the communities there, who had suffered so much under the occupation of the Indonesians, and before that, the Portuguese. And it's incredible when communities come together to make meaningful change for their children and their communities, and it's just been, that was again a really powerful experience, and really made me love working at the community level. And then even before that, I worked in an indigenous community in the Northern Territory, and that really struck me how important our indigenous people are, and that we need to recognise their tradition and knowledge and raise their voices and agency through everything that we do. So, of course, when I had the opportunity to work at ChildFund, which is an organisation that puts communities first and children at the centre of everything they do, I really jumped at that opportunity. And as I said, I've had the most amazing journey over the last 5 years.
Beautiful. And it's so interesting, because I was reading before that as well, and trying to see a little bit about your journey with all of this. And it is incredible. I think a lot of times how our childhood experience and our perspective can lead us in a different path, because when one becomes aware of an issue and it's close to our heart, it's much easier for us to take action with that, and to be able to understand the importance of it, and to understand a lot of times and this is something that I speak about often. I know my privilege. I know that, like, yeah, I'm not a millionaire or anything, but comparing to lots of people, even growing up in Argentina, growing up near the slums, like, I could see a lot of the inequalities, and I could see a lot of things happening. And I think that it's so incredible when we can actually see that and do something about that. And I wanted to ask in terms of that. So how was the experience? I think that you just mentioned, like, one of your first experiences was working in the Northern Territories with the Aboriginal people. What was that comparing to your upbringing, like that different perspective of how to see life?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I've actually been thinking about this recently and thinking about the sort of questions you might ask me. And so I was thinking about why I wanted to get into international development. And I remember I'd never traveled overseas, but when I was 18, I went with my brother and we traveled around Southeast Asia. And I saw enormous poverty and vulnerability, and it was really shocking to me. And so I was really sort of motivated to do something meaningful after that trip. And so that's why I went to university and I studied and got into this area of work. But now I reflect back again, and I think I grew up in Australia where there was enormous vulnerability and at-risk communities, right, in our neighborhood, and I lived this privileged experience and this lifestyle, and thought it was always something over there. And I'm now reflecting on the fact that we are so aware that poverty isn't something that just happens over in other countries, but it actually exists in our community, and that we really need to be doing that. And also I reflected on the fact that we took it so much for granted that we could just travel over there, and that's such an amazing privilege to be able to go on a trip. And for many communities around the world, sometimes the children can't even get into secondary school, and yet for me to have that privilege to go and learn and experience the world was really great. And I guess now I really recognize this even more, that we have COVID and we can't move or go anywhere, and to think about how the world has dramatically changed and has created so much more need, but also exacerbated those inequalities.
Yes, and I think that a lot of times this is like perspective, and this is being able to understand where we are standing, and to understand also how sometimes, as I said, like, we take some things for granted because they are just there, and it's like, and suddenly something happens, it's like, oh no, like, now what do we do? And I'm interested, on something that I've spoken about with some people here in New Zealand, because I've noticed a lot of times, with Conscious Action, we put on screenings of documentaries, and I noticed that with a lot of documentaries, of course, are not made in New Zealand, are made somewhere in the US or Europe, and a lot of people weren't as connected with that which was happening abroad. They were asking me, yes, but this isn't happening in New Zealand like this, or stuff like that. How, through your experience working in different countries, and as well through your work now with ChildFund, how do you see this difference of people wanting to support things that are local versus supporting that which is in another place? Because as you just mentioned, like, things happen both where we live, but also abroad.
Absolutely. And so, as I discussed it, when I was growing up, it was always, these far-off countries, there was famine and disease and drought and all these things happening. But in my lifetime, as I said, we're starting to see more and more that poverty is in our backyards. And I think that has accelerated. And in the last 5 years I've been at ChildFund, we've seen in New Zealand that there is enormous vulnerability and poverty, and some communities are just not accessing the things that they need to have a good life, and they're just not getting their basic needs. So it's really interesting. And so even we're hearing our donors and supporters, they're saying, what about New Zealand? And for me, and I feel very strongly about this, we don't have to choose between helping people over there and helping people here. We can do both. And the thing is, and what we can do is, and what I've seen at ChildFund is when there's really great programs and quality programs that put children at the centre or women at the centre, and that are driven by the communities, then you can make meaningful change.
Yes, definitely. And I would love if you can explore it a little bit more and expand on this, and I've talked about this a lot with the founders of Karma Drinks, and like the possibility of being able to work with the communities and to support the communities and the education of the girls especially, and to support women and to be able to give them the tools so that they become self-sufficient, and then it's just a partner in trading instead of someone that is being supported. Can you expand a little bit what this means for these communities, and what is the work that is needed to develop programs that are going to do that?
Absolutely. So it's interesting. Yeah, the world has changed so much in the last 100 years. And so when international development started, it was very much taking things probably from the more richer countries and saying, this is what you need to develop. But actually a lot of thinking and work has gone into actually looking at, how we do deliver meaningful support to communities. And so the way ChildFund works actually is really, we've really embraced the fact that communities have to lead their own development, and there's no, one solution that will fix everything. The solutions absolutely have to come from the communities. And what we know at ChildFund is that, the communities, they know their challenges, they live them day to day, and they also therefore know their solutions. So in everything that we do at ChildFund, the communities and the families are driving the work. And so we actually have this roadmap program, and it's all about road mapping with our partners towards self-reliance. So that involved the communities with all their stakeholders and the women and the children involved, and saying, this is the things that we need to be self-reliant. And if ChildFund can support us, that's great. Or if the government or if other organisations can help us, that's wonderful. And to support them on this journey to a point where ChildFund and the other organisations step off, and that community is standing on their own 2 feet. So of course we're called ChildFund, so children are at the centre. So we know that for children to thrive, they have to be, there's a number of things that have to come into play to support them to thrive. And that is ensuring the women are supported and empowered. And because, women are often the main carers, so they need all the tools to support them in their livelihoods, but in maternal health. Then also they need schools and access to books and all those facilities. And they need to stay safe as well. So we work in a community in Zambia where there's wild elephants and snakes and all sorts of animals, dangerous animals around. And so we need to make sure that those children, when they're walking to school, they will get to school safely and they can learn, and to ensure that they have food so they can learn. So there's all these parts that have to wrap around children to ensure that they have the best chance at life.
Beautiful. And so how does this process work in terms of how do you choose what are the programs or the communities that you're going to work with? And can you share some example of some of the programs?
Yes. So we have a really great program in Kenya, actually, that involves growing Moringa. Mm-hmm. Now, this is a perfect example of communities knowing what they need to drive their development forward. And so Moringa really is a miracle tree. And actually communities in Asia and throughout Africa and even the Pacific, they know about this tree. And they grow it in their backyards and have been doing so for a long time. And I think in no time, New Zealand will be growing it too. And it's so great that traditional knowledge survives and is continuing to support communities. But this program in Kenya that works with Moringa, the farmers have been growing it in their backyards, really, on their land, because it survives drought. And I've been over to visit our communities in Kenya, and the community is Mali. And I've been over a couple of times when we could travel, and I've seen like no rainfall and times of drought, and this tree truly does survive. And but what the great thing is about this tree and why it's called the miracle tree is because it is rich in antioxidants, high in vitamins and minerals, and it's high in protein as well. And so for communities that perhaps if their food security is low, so that means if the drought or a flood comes through and wipes out their crops, they will have this tree that can provide them with the nutrition that they need to have a healthy life. And what else is amazing about this tree is that because it's full of protein, the vitamins and the nutrients and the protein go into the soil and also help all the other crops around them. And then the twigs can be used to feed cows, and that boosts their milk production, which then is another source of food for communities. The families eat the leaves and the seeds. But then what is also so amazing is that the families can, with this crop, they can sell their produce, so the leaves and the seeds, and make money. And that puts money into their pockets so they can provide for their children, and they don't need to have their hand out and asking for money. So that's that whole self-reliance piece.
Beautiful. I was introduced to Moringa, like 10 years ago or something like that by my naturopath. And it was one of those things, that she recommended. I was just, like have these different powders, like have some spirulina, have some goji berries, have some kale, have some Moringa. I had never heard of it before. And through the years and knowing as well the health benefits, but I think that not only the health benefits that is really important, as you were saying, this is a tree that grows in really rough conditions. And this, I think that this is such a good thing to keep in mind as our weather keeps on changing, our climate keeps on changing, and we don't know what's going to happen. The fact that there's communities that can actually have this and not being reliant so much on the rain if that's not there, or the fact that this is one of the topics that I'm super passionate about and that I don't think that a lot of people talk about enough, is the fact that our soil is really depleted and it's not going to last much longer as like a good quality soil to grow things. A tree like this can actually grow in really harsh conditions of soil. And that enables those communities that might have that happening, as you were just saying, a way to grow this tree and to use it in all these different ways and to be able to make a living out of that.
Absolutely. As I said, I've been over there and I've seen it. And what's most amazing about this tree? It can do all of these things: support animal health, human health, provide incomes. But it's, when you see it, it's the most humble tree you've ever seen. It's very small and it just has some twigs. But in spite of that, in size and everything, it produces leaves every 6 months. So it really does support families to create this income and to support their health at home. And what is amazing as well is we have a community, a member over there, and his story is that he's growing a number of trees. He has a small crop, but and to support his family and the income. But the leaves, which they make into a powder, into a tea, helps with his hypertension. So that is, medical condition that can be very dangerous. And in places like Mali, which is so spread out, the land is so vast. And so accessing medical services or getting medicine can be a challenge. And so there's, having this crop in the backyard that just solves that problem.
Beautiful. And I was wondering, would you be able to share a little bit more of how was your experience being there with them and seeing how they live, just to give us a picture of, how does that look?
So actually, it's really interesting. So in Mali, and as I mentioned, I grew up in a country town and also lived in the Northern Territory. And what is so amazing is the land is quite red and dry, just like those places and communities I experienced back in Australia. So sort of, it was so powerful to me, and it just resonated so strongly how devastating drought can be, and that, these communities are living there and with these challenges with climate change. And these communities, are largely, they have small land for farming. And so they really haven't contributed to the greenhouse gases and the carbon emissions that is causing this devastating climate change. So that's something that's really powerful when you're there. But also what is really powerful is, as I said, the communities, they know their challenges, and they are determined to make things different and, commit to meaningful action for their children. And so when I've been there, I've always been completely in awe of the hard work that the communities are putting in to change their circumstances. And also our local partners who are there on the ground who are driving this work forward. And it really puts in perspective for me that, we can support with vital resources such as funding from the generous New Zealand public, and the New Zealand government has supported as well these communities. But really, it's all about partnership and creating the environment for the communities and our partners to be driving the change, because they really understand what they need to do to make things better for children.
So beautiful. And so what can people do in terms of supporting this? Is this like a matter of support with the nations? Is this a matter of, like in this case, for example, with the Moringa, is this like buying Moringa from these communities? What is the action that people can take?
So absolutely. So for me, and I saw on your website, which I love, by the way, and as I said, it really resonates with me about collaboration and connections. So I think firstly, if anyone's interested in Moringa or in supporting communities like this, you can go to the ChildFund website, which is childfund.org.nz, and look up and learn. And connect with these stories that we've talked about, learn information about Moringa and also about the Mali communities. And also you can see information on our roadmap approach. So how you can support communities to make that change that they want to do and they want to do for their children. Also, as I said, it's about people can help through supporting and donating to good quality programs that do put communities and children at the centre. So, of course, ChildFund has some great programs, and I can attest to that, having seen that over the last 5 years and the change it has made with on the ground. But also there's a number of great programs out there. And as I said, you don't have to choose between helping New Zealand and helping overseas. There's certainly a lot of need, and we know that the need is growing because of COVID. But also as well, I want to say is that you can make meaningful action. And I know, and that can be through support and engaging with programs such as ChildFund New Zealand. And because it does feel overwhelming sometimes, knowing that there's so much to do in the climate change space. And we see on the news the challenges in Afghanistan and the devastating earthquake in Haiti. So it does feel overwhelming. But I can say, having seen the work of our programs, all that support and the donations and the engagement through ChildFund does make a difference.
Yeah, and I often say to people, we do the best that we can with tools that we have, and one of the things that I usually invite people to see is how they connect with something to be able to make that decision or that choice on what to support or what to do, whether that is with money or time or sharing the knowledge or whatever it is. And I think that is super important, as you were just saying, like reading the stories of what's going on, because a lot of times that's how we connect. I was talking to someone on a workshop last year, and they were saying that for the first time ever, they traveled outside of New Zealand to some places, and they felt super guilty because of their privilege. And I told them, I can understand that, especially if they never had that connection with that, but that guilt is not going to help them or the people that they were feeling that for. And it's like, okay, how can I start to actually do something for that instead of being paralyzed by it? And as you were just saying, there is so much going on in the world. All that we can do is, choose what is close to our heart and choose to go with that. And sometimes that means that's going to be for your neighborhood community, that's going to be for where your family came from, where, like something that you saw that touched you. There's so many different approaches that we can take, but it's about going to do something that is meaningful and to be okay with the fact that we cannot solve everything as individuals. But if we are all doing something, then we're going to start to make changes.
Absolutely. And I think, it's really important to recognize privilege and how blessed we are. I mean, at the moment, I am already, I'm thinking about my family back home in Melbourne in lockdown and thinking how grateful I am to live in this very amazing country, New Zealand, and very beautiful country. But to recognize, yes, we do have so much, but that means that we can make meaningful action. And as you said, collectively, if we come together, raise our voices and ensure that, we're supporting programs that's raising the voices as well of some of the people the most vulnerable people who often aren't heard, then that can be very powerful.
Yes, definitely. And I wanted to know, based on your experience, do most people know about something like Moringa? Like, because I've known about it for like quite a while now, but I don't know, like, is that common knowledge for people?
So it's really interesting. So we were at the food show a couple of weeks ago, and we had a stand. It was Moringa, and because ChildFund New Zealand now really wants to support the communities in Kenya to grow 50,000 trees, which obviously, as we know, is great for health and nutrition, and it's great for incomes, but also great for the environment. So we're at the food show, and it was such a great experience to meet people face to face and talk about Moringa and Child Fund and child poverty and all those related issues. But what was quite outstanding was people from either an Asian background, a Pacific background, or we did meet someone from Zimbabwe. They all knew about Moringa, and sometimes it's referred to as the drumstick tree. And so, yes, so communities around the world know, but people who have largely grown up in New Zealand or Australia have never really heard about it. So it is really interesting, as I said, that, there is this traditional knowledge, and communities have been using this for a long time. And these are probably communities that perhaps didn't have access to medical services and medicine like we've been used to. And so they know that this tree, is a life changer.
Yes. And I think it's really interesting, the fact that we are starting to see more ancient knowledge and more knowledge from some of the Aboriginal communities to start to come to be of use, because as I often say, like, the answers are already there. It's just going back to those and to be able to, as you just said, like to hear those voices that have not been heard or have been underrepresented. And it's going back to those basics of being more attuned with the land and being able to be more connected with what is helpful. Like I was talking a couple of times with some people, both for the podcast and outside of the podcast, on Rongoa Maori, and it's like the knowledge of how to use all of the plants, and both for nutrition and for healing. And most people have no idea about that. And we rely on so many other things that would be much easier to just go to the bush and just, like grab a plant and just put it in my face rather than having to go to a doctor or something like that. But luckily, this is starting to become more and more more prevalent, having these traditions here. And before we start to finish this episode, I wanted to know, based on your experience, not only with ChildFund, but everything, what is the one thing that you wish that everyone knew?
So I think I've touched on it, but it's absolutely that local people, local communities know their solutions. And so anything that we can do, and that's through something like the Moringa or other programs to support them is vital. The local knowledge, as you were saying, and that these communities know how to look after the environment, live within their environment, and also the opportunities for them to make change. So that's what I want to say, is that everyone that we work with overseas in these communities are really smart and sophisticated people. They need some resources and support to make the change for their children, but they really are committed to that. And so I guess it's, that whole thing around meaningful action, and they are doing it and living it every day. And as I said, we are really aware that the need for these communities is going to grow with COVID, and it's going to go on for some time. And we possibly haven't seen the worst of it yet. And so anything that we can do to support through donations or engagement or raising our voices about climate change or child poverty really does go a long way to support these communities who are doing such hard and amazing work for their children.
Beautiful. Yes, and it is, as we've been talking, like all of these things are big topics, and I think that a lot of times it's hard to engage with them if we are not living close to that, and getting that, as we were talking before, like becoming overwhelmed with all of that. But it's about doing something. It's about doing that next thing. Like as I usually on these episodes, like I ask like some tips, like for people. I think that you've just touched on that several times on like just go and check, go to the websites, donate if that's what you can do. Like it's about being able to just find the way that actually we can take some action and not just becoming completely still and frozen, and also not connected, because we are all connected, and in this type of topics where there's some exploration of, like for me, of child poverty, of underprivileged communities, of climate change. These are things that are affecting everyone, even if we don't live near that, even if we live in a place where climate change hasn't actually made a lot of like challenges for life, we are still all going to be affected. We are already being affected by it, but it's about how do we engage with it and how do we stay open to that.
Absolutely. And that's why I do love your website, and it talks about collaboration, connection, and compassion. And I think, we are really facing enormous challenges. But if we do come together and we learn from each other and learn from communities like in Mali with the Moringa, and we are compassionate and we think about our privilege and we and think about how much we've got and the advantages or perhaps the disadvantages, and just and be very compassionate around that, I think, we can make meaningful action.
Yes, so beautiful. So once again, for everyone that is listening, how can they find more about ChildFund and this particular project and what they can do?
So, yes, please visit our website. So that's childfund.org.nz. There's a lot of information about where we work in Mali and the Moringa, but also in the other communities we work with in Zambia, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, and the Pacific. So that's Kiribati, Solomon Islands, and PNG, and of course Timor-Leste as well. And so you can learn about our approach, our road mapping approach, and how we support self-reliance. And you can also learn about our programs and that support children to thrive.
Beautiful. And as we were just talking all throughout, it's so important for the future of the world to actually support children and to be able to give them the tools necessary to navigate through life in whatever conditions they were born into. And the more that we can support communities to become self-reliant and to be able to thrive, then everybody's going to have a better opportunity for that. So thank you, Quenelda, for taking the time to share with us. Thank you for all of the work that you are doing with all of these communities and all of the support that you're having with all of these communities and the work that ChildFund does as well. And I'm always going to say this for people listening. What did resonate and how are you doing something around this topic? How are you being touched by this topic? Did you learn something new? How are you going to be able to support that if that is something that you want to? So I encourage, as Quenelda was just saying, go to the website, check it out, and let us know whenever you listen to this episode, what resonated with you, what touched you, what did you learn? So thank you, Quenelda, once again for being
Thanks
here.
for having me.
Yes, and for sharing, and hopefully I'll be able to meet you sometime soon. And I'm going to, now that we've talked about this, I'm going to go and top up on my Moringa and to be able to get some more. So thank you so much for being here. And for everyone listening, until next time, see ya.
What did you like the most about this episode? Take a moment to think about what change you can make in your life today.
Share your conscious action on social media using #ConsciousAction and tagging @ConsciousActionNZ so we can celebrate your impact on the world and create a ripple effect.
One easy action we would love for you to take right now is to share, like, and subscribe to this podcast. This will help us get these messages out into the world and inspire more people to take conscious action in their own lives, contributing to the better world we hope for.